Pack up and stay out of sight for 2 weeks. The words didn't come from the CEO. They came from his nephew, delivered casually in the middle of the acquisition process, as if he were asking me to clear a conference room, not disappear from a company I had helped hold together for 9 years. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't look uncomfortable. He leaned against the doorway of my office, arms crossed, wearing a visitor badge he no longer needed because everyone already knew who he was. "I'll handle anything critical," he added. "We don't want unnecessary noise while the buyers are watching." I looked at him for a moment, long enough to make it clear I had heard every word. Then I nodded once. "No problem," I said. That seemed to satisfy him. He smiled, tapped the doorframe with his knuckle, and walked off toward the executive wing like he had just solved something. "My name is Claire." And at that moment, I already knew exactly how expensive that sentence was going to be for him. 2 hours earlier, the acquisition team from Halverson Group had arrived. Lawyers, finance leads, integration specialists. Serious people who asked serious questions. Our CEO, Martin, had been unusually quiet that day. He sat at the head of the table, nodded when required, and deferred often. Not to me. To his nephew, Michel. Michel had joined the company 8 months earlier. Official title: Strategic Operations Advisor. Unofficial role: future replacement. Everyone knew it. No one said it. Martin was stepping back after the acquisition. Michel was stepping forward. And apparently, I was supposed to step out of sight. What Michel didn't understand was this. I wasn't noise. I was structure. For 9 years, I had been head of enterprise integration. That meant I didn't just manage systems. I designed how information moved, how approvals escalated, how failures were contained before they became disasters. When our logistics platform nearly collapsed during a regional outage 3 years ago, I was the one who rerouted traffic manually for 14 hours straight. When regulators audited our data handling, I wrote the remediation plan they still referenced. When vendors threatened penalties, I negotiated clauses that kept us solvent. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't political. I was dependable. And in an acquisition, dependability is not optional. After Michel left my doorway, I didn't pack anything. I didn't announce my absence. I forwarded my calendar to myself, cleaned up my inbox, and continued exactly as before. Quietly. The buyers noticed. They noticed because when their due diligence questions came in, answers arrived fast. Clean, documented. Not vague assurances, not "we'll circle back." Actual files, process maps, audit trails. At first, they didn't know it was me. The questions came through finance, through legal, through project managers who had learned over the years that if something needed to be accurate, it needed to come past my desk. Michel was busy performing. He talked about agility, about vision, about post-close acceleration. He answered operational questions with confidence and very little detail. The buyers nodded politely and wrote things down. On the second day, Halverson's integration lead asked a simple question in the main conference room. Who owns continuity authority during the transition? Mikkel answered immediately. That would fall under executive leadership. She tilted her head slightly. Documented where? Michel smiled. It's standard. I didn't say anything. I didn't look up. I just noted the timestamp. By the end of that day, an email landed in my inbox directly. Not through Michel, not through Martin. Claire, it read, could you clarify how operational overrides are handled during leadership transitions? We'd like to ensure no gaps post-close. No urgency, no flattery, just a precise question. I replied with one attachment and 2 sentences explaining what it was. 10 minutes later, another message arrived. Thank you. Very helpful. The next morning, Michel announced I would be off rotation for the remainder of the diligence phase. He framed it as efficiency, as protection. Claire's earned a breather, he said, smiling at the room. We don't need everyone in every meeting. No one challenged him. That wasn't surprising. Michel had the last name, and soon the title. What he didn't have was visibility into how the acquisition was actually unfolding. Because while I wasn't in the meetings, my work was. Every risk memo referenced processes I had designed. Every operational dependency traced back to decisions I had documented years earlier. And when inconsistencies appeared between Michelle's answers and the actual system behavior, the buyers didn't argue. They asked questions. Quiet ones. To me. On the fourth day, Halverson's CEO arrived in person. Older. Observant. He spoke less than Michelle and listened more. He shook my hand briefly when introduced, his grip firm, his eyes steady. "Claire," he said, "I've seen your name a lot this week." I smiled politely. "I tend to stay behind the scenes." "That's usually where the real work is," he replied. Later that afternoon, Michelle cornered me near the break room. "Just so we're clear," he said, lowering his voice. "I don't need you jumping in unless I ask. This is sensitive." I nodded. "Of course." He walked away, satisfied. The final diligence meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. Senior leadership only. Buyers, lawyers, executives. I wasn't on the invite. I still attended. Not because I forced my way in. Not because I demanded a seat. Because 15 minutes before the meeting started, Halverson's CEO stopped me in the hallway. "Claire," he said, "do you have a card?" I reached into my jacket and handed it to him. Simple, clean. My name. My role. One additional line most people never noticed. He glanced at it once. Then he looked up at me. Then he walked into the conference room, took his seat, and placed my card on the table in front of him. When Michelle noticed it, he frowned. "What's that?" he asked, chuckling lightly. The buyer's CEO picked up the card again, read it more carefully this time, then looked straight at Michelle. And suddenly he burst out laughing. The laughter didn't fill the room. It didn't need to. It was short, surprised, and entirely uncontrolled. The kind that escapes before etiquette can catch it. Mikkel's smile froze halfway. "I'm not sure what's funny," he said, still trying to sound relaxed. Halverson's CEO wiped the corner of his eye, composed himself, and placed my card flat on the table, aligning it carefully with the edge. "I apologize," he said calmly. "That wasn't directed at you. It was the timing." Michelle glanced around the room, looking for backup. Martin avoided eye contact. Legal shuffled papers. Someone cleared their throat. "What timing?" Michelle pressed. Instead of answering, the buyer's CEO turned to me. "Claire, would you mind taking a seat?" Every chair at the table was already occupied. One of Halverson's directors stood immediately and pulled his chair back. "Please." I sat. Michelle's jaw tightened. The meeting resumed, but the temperature had changed. The easy assumptions Michelle had walked in with, authority by proximity, control by title, were no longer holding. Questions started coming slower, more precise. "Let's revisit continuity authority," Halverson's CEO said, fingers steepled. "We've reviewed the operational framework you submitted." He nodded toward me. Michelle jumped in. "As I mentioned earlier, that's handled at the executive level." "Yes," the CEO replied evenly, "but not in practice." He slid a document across the table. "This is your internal escalation matrix. Last updated 18 months ago. Claire authored it." Michelle blinked. "That's outdated." "It was referenced in your most recent compliance audit," the CEO said. 6 weeks ago." Silence. "Our concern," he continued, "is that during transition, authority must be explicit, especially where risk is concentrated." He turned another page. "According to this, operational overrides during acquisition default to a designated continuity lead." Michelle leaned forward. "Which would be—" "Claire," the CEO finished. Michelle laughed, sharp and defensive. "That can't be right. Claire reports into operations. She's not executive." I didn't react. I didn't need to. Halverson's general counsel spoke for the first time. "Titles are irrelevant in this context. Authority is contractual." Martin shifted uncomfortably. I don't recall agreeing to that. The lawyer met his eyes. You did. Page 12, paragraph C. She slid the agreement toward him. Martin read. Slowly, Michelle's confidence faltered. So you're saying she outranks me? No, the CEO replied. I'm saying she controls continuity, which means any structural changes, staffing decisions, or system modifications during transition require her approval. Michelle turned to me, incredulous. You didn't tell me this. I met his gaze. You didn't ask. That landed harder than I expected. Michelle flushed. This is absurd. She's been sidelined for weeks. Yes, the CEO said, which is why this is concerning. He leaned back. When someone who holds this much institutional knowledge is removed from visibility during diligence, it raises flags. Michelle straightened. I was reducing noise. The CEO smiled faintly. You were creating blind spots. No one spoke. The meeting continued, but Michelle was no longer leading it. Questions bypassed him. When operational scenarios were discussed, eyes turned to me. When timelines were debated, I was asked whether they were feasible. I answered plainly. No commentary, no emotion. By the end, the conclusion was unavoidable. We'll need to pause any leadership-driven changes until continuity oversight is clarified, the CEO said, effective immediately. Michelle stood abruptly. You can't just freeze progress. We can, the CEO replied, and we are. The meeting adjourned without ceremony. No one lingered. In the hallway, Michelle caught up to me. You blindsided me. I stopped walking. You told me to stay out of sight. That didn't mean... It meant exactly that, I said. You wanted the room without the infrastructure. He scoffed. You went behind my back. I responded to direct questions, I said. That's not betrayal. That's competence. He stared at me for a long moment. You think this makes you powerful? No, I replied. It makes the company stable. He turned away, jaw tight. By the next morning, the shift was visible. My inbox filled with requests, clarifications, confirmations, approvals, all marked urgent, all routed through Halverson's integration team. Michelle was copied, but no longer central. He sent a company-wide message announcing a temporary pause on strategic initiatives. He framed it as collaboration, as alignment, but people knew. Managers stopped waiting for Michelle's approval and started checking with me. Not because I asked them to, because risk had a new address. At noon, Halverson's CEO requested a private meeting. You handled that well, he said once the door closed. I handled my role, I replied. He nodded. That line on your card, he added. Most people don't include it. It's usually ignored, I said. Not by us. He folded his hands. We're going to formalize continuity authority before close, for the sake of clarity. I understood what that meant. Michelle would too. Soon. As I left the room, I passed Michelle in the corridor. He looked smaller somehow, less certain. You planned this, he said quietly. I shook my head. I prepared for it. There's a difference. That afternoon, a revised transition document circulated internally. Draft only, restricted, under governance, continuity lead, Claire M. No announcement, no fanfare, just ink. And ink, once it dries, doesn't care who thought they were in charge. Authority doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself in what stops happening. By midweek, meetings Michelle used to run were quietly canceled or rescheduled pending continuity review. Proposals that once moved in hours stalled in inboxes waiting for approval that didn't come. People didn't ask why. They adjusted. Michelle noticed. He started copying me on emails he had never included me on before. Short messages, clipped tone. FYI. Looping you in. For awareness. He never asked for approval directly. That would have meant acknowledging it existed. Instead, he tried to move around it. The first attempt came disguised as urgency. Late Tuesday afternoon, procurement flagged an issue. One of our largest regional carriers had suspended service over a payment dispute. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but it would be within 48 hours if unresolved. Michael replied first. He approved a temporary reroute through an alternate carrier and authorized a manual override in the system. He shouldn't have been able to. The override failed. Not because the system was broken, but because 3 months earlier I had tightened permissions in preparation for acquisition. Emergency access required continuity sign-off. Michelle's credentials didn't qualify. By the time I saw the alert, the reroute was half-configured and fully stalled. I didn't fix it immediately. I opened the logs, captured timestamps, screenshots, approval attempts. Then I called the carrier directly, negotiated a 72-hour extension, and restored service using the documented fallback path. Once everything was stable, I sent a single email to Halverson's integration risk mailbox. Subject line, unauthorized override attempt, resolved. No commentary, just evidence. Michelle stormed into my office 10 minutes later. "You undermined me," he said, not bothering to close the door. "I prevented an outage," I replied. "You could have just approved it." "You didn't ask." His jaw tightened. "You're enjoying this." I looked at him. "I'm working." He laughed, short and humorless. "You think they'll keep you once this is done?" I didn't answer. Threats only work when they're credible. The next day, Michelle tried a different angle. He scheduled a leadership sync for Thursday morning. Executive only. I wasn't invited. Again. What he didn't realize was that Halverson's integration lead had already placed a hold on all leadership changes until continuity authority was finalized. The meeting violated that condition. 10 minutes after it ended, my phone rang. "Claire," she said, skipping pleasantries. "Were you aware of a proposed restructuring discussed this morning?" "No," I said, "and it wouldn't be valid without review." There was a pause, papers shifting. "Can you send us the documentation supporting that?" "I already have," I replied. "Check yesterday's folder." By lunch, Halverson froze all internal restructuring communications. Michelle sent another company-wide note blaming process overlap and temporary governance friction. People stopped reading his emails closely after that. What finally exposed the gap wasn't ego. It was habit. Michelle was used to moving fast, to making decisions and having them stick. He kept trying to operate that way even when the structure had changed. On Friday, he approved a staffing reduction in one of our fulfillment hubs. Small on paper. 3 supervisors reassigned. No formal layoffs, just optimization. That hub handled regulated shipments. Reassigning supervisory authority there required regulatory notification, which he didn't file. I found out when compliance forwarded me a draft inquiry from the oversight agency asking why reporting signatures no longer matched. I didn't forward it to Michelle. I scheduled a call with Halverson's legal counsel instead. They were quiet when I walked them through the sequence. Very quiet. "This is exactly the risk we flagged," one of them said finally. "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm escalating." They asked if the change could be reversed. "It already has been," I said. "Effective immediately." By the end of the day, Halverson issued a formal directive. Any staffing, system, or vendor changes required continuity approval. Non-compliance would be treated as breach of transition protocol. Michelle received the same notice as everyone else. He didn't come to the office the following Monday. When he did return, something had shifted. He spoke less, watched more. He stopped issuing directives and started asking questions that circled the same point. "How long does this last? When does authority revert? What happens post-close?" I answered honestly. "That depends on stability." He didn't like that answer. The final incident came unexpectedly. A junior analyst forwarded me an email chain by mistake. Michelle had been in contact with an external consultant, proposing changes to our data handling architecture post-close. Preliminary discussions, he called it. The problem wasn't the discussion, it was the assumption. He was planning future state architecture without clearance, with a third party, during active diligence. I forwarded the chain to Halverson with a single line. Unapproved external engagement for review. This time, they didn't call. They scheduled a meeting. Final transition review, mandatory attendance. Michel didn't speak to me before it. He sat across the room, rigid, eyes fixed forward. He had finally realized what was happening, but not how to stop it. As the meeting began, Halverson's CEO didn't waste time. We need to address governance failures, he said, specifically repeated attempts to bypass continuity authority. Michel opened his mouth. The CEO raised a hand. This isn't a debate. He turned to me. Claire, do you confirm these actions occurred without approval? Yes, I said. And that corrective action has been taken each time. Documented? Yes. The room went still. Michel looked around, searching for support. Martin stared at the table. This isn't personal, the CEO said finally, but it is decisive. I knew then what was coming. Not because I wanted it, because the system demanded it, and systems, when ignored long enough, don't warn you again. The meeting didn't end with raised voices. That was the part Michel hadn't prepared for. Halverson's CEO closed his folder, looked around the table once, and said, We'll need a short recess. Not to gather thoughts, to formalize decisions. Michel stood halfway out of his chair. You can't make personnel decisions without... This isn't personnel. The CEO interrupted calmly. This is risk containment. Legal followed him out. So did the integration lead. The door closed behind them with a soft click that somehow sounded final. No one spoke. Martin rubbed his forehead. He looked older than he had a week ago. Tired in a way that comes from realizing you handed something important to the wrong person and waited too long to fix it. Michel sat back down slowly. His confidence hadn't vanished yet, but it was cracked. He leaned toward me. You've made your point, he said quietly. You can stop now. I met his eyes. This isn't something I turn on or off. He scoffed. You think they'll sideline me? I'm family. I didn't respond. Assumptions like that don't need arguments. They collapse on their own. When the door reopened, the room felt smaller. Halverson's CEO took a seat and folded his hands. We've reviewed the pattern, he said. Repeated governance breaches during a regulated transition. That's not a learning curve. That's a liability. Michel straightened. I was acting in the company's best interest. So was Claire, the CEO replied. The difference is her actions reduced risk. Yours increased it. Martin opened his mouth, then closed it. For the remainder of the transition, the CEO continued, operational authority will be consolidated under continuity leadership, effective immediately. Michel frowned. That's already the case. Yes, the CEO said. This goes further. He slid a single-page document across the table toward Michel. Your role is being modified. Michel picked it up. His eyes moved quickly, then slowed. What is this? He asked. A reassignment, the CEO said. Facilities operations, Midwest region. Reporting to regional leadership. No direct involvement in corporate systems, staffing, or vendors. Michel laughed, breathless. You're demoting me. We're repositioning you, the CEO replied. Same compensation, narrower scope, lower risk. You can't do this without my uncle's approval. Martin didn't look up. You have it. That was the moment Michel finally understood he was alone. He looked at me, not angry. Something closer to betrayed disbelief. You wanted this. I shook my head. I wanted stability. He stood abruptly. This is a mistake. No, the CEO said. It's a correction. The meeting ended there. No debate, no appeal process. Michelle walked out without another word. The building felt different after that. Quieter. Not tense. Settled. Like a machine that had stopped rattling. By the next morning, the changes were visible. Michelle's access to shared systems was reduced. Approvals rerouted automatically. His calendar emptied. Mine didn't. Requests came in steadily. Not dramatic, just necessary. Vendors needing confirmation. Compliance needing signatures. Teams asking what could move forward and what couldn't. I answered all of it. At noon, Martin asked to speak with me privately. I should have stepped in earlier, he said once the door closed. I thought blood would buy loyalty. It usually buys confidence, I replied. Not competence. He nodded. They'll finalize governance tomorrow. Are you ready for that? I've been ready for years. That afternoon, Michelle sent me a message. We need to talk. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. There was nothing left to explain. The real work began then. I reinstated the controls Michelle had overridden, reversed the staffing changes at the regulated hub, and personally called the supervisors involved. No speeches. Just clarity and apology where it was owed. I coordinated with Halverson's team to document every restored process. Clean handoffs, verified logs, no gaps. By Thursday, the transition timeline stabilized. Risks downgraded. Legal stopped flagging new issues. Halverson's integration lead called late afternoon. This is what we hoped would happen, she said. We just didn't expect it to be this clean. It's only clean because it's boring, I replied. She laughed. That's exactly right. Friday morning, Michel cleared out his office. He avoided the executive wing, took the side elevator. I saw him once in the hallway, carrying a box with no logo, no personal flair. He stopped when he saw me. I didn't think it would end like this, he said quietly. Most people don't, I replied. He hesitated. Was there a point where I could have stopped it? Yes, I said. Several. He nodded, absorbing that. You never warned me. I did, I said. You called it resistance. That stung. I could tell. He left without another word. That afternoon, Halverson circulated the finalized governance structure. No names highlighted, no announcement, just authority mapped clearly, correctly. Under continuity leadership, Claire M. I didn't celebrate. I reviewed the document, signed where required, and forwarded it to the teams who needed to see it. Because revenge wasn't the point. Correction was. And the system had finally aligned itself with reality. There was just one chapter left to close. The acquisition closed without ceremony. No champagne, no speeches, just signatures, timestamps, and a quiet confirmation email sent at 6:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. By the time most employees logged in, the deal was done. That was intentional. When transitions go well, they don't feel like events. They feel like continuity. My role became permanent the same way, without announcement. Halverson issued a revised org structure, effective immediately. Authority lines clarified. Escalation paths locked. My title didn't change. My scope did. And for the first time since Michael told me to disappear, the company moved without friction. The first week post-close was operational, not political. Vendors were re-engaged. Payment terms restored. Compliance reports validated cleanly. The oversight agency closed its inquiry without follow-up. One email, one sentence. No further action required. That was the metric that mattered. Teams adjusted quickly. Not because they were told to, but because uncertainty had been removed. Decisions had owners again. Questions had answers that didn't change depending on who was in the room. I walked the fulfillment floor that Friday, not as a gesture, as a check. A supervisor waved me over. It feels normal again, she said. Not rushed, just clear. Clear was good. By the second week, Halverson's integration team stopped asking daily questions and started planning forward. That's always the signal. When oversight shifts from verification to optimization, stability has returned. Michelle was already gone by then. Midwest assignment. Facilities operations. Night shifts, from what I heard. He didn't announce it. His internal profile updated quietly. I didn't follow his move. I didn't need to. The only time I heard from him again was a month later. A message, late evening. No subject line. I didn't understand what you were doing. I think I do now. I stared at it longer than necessary, then replied with one sentence. Learn the work. It changes how you see authority. He responded once. Thank you. That was enough. By the end of the quarter, the metrics told the story no one needed to narrate. On-time delivery rates exceeded pre-acquisition levels. Vendor disputes dropped to 0. Audit flags closed faster than projected. Quiet improvements, the kind that never make slides. Halverson's CEO asked me to walk him through operations one afternoon. No entourage, no cameras, just questions and pauses. He listened more than he spoke. At the end, he said, most people think leadership is momentum. But it's alignment. I nodded. Momentum without structure is just speed. A week later, his office sent over a formal offer. Expanded authority, equity. A mandate to build succession planning into every critical function, including mine. That mattered more than the title, because the final correction wasn't Michelle's reassignment. It was removing single points of failure altogether. I delegated, documented, trained people who had never been allowed to own decisions before. I made myself less essential on purpose. That's how systems survive. 3 months later, no one mentioned the meeting where Michel laughed. Not because it was forgotten, but because it had become irrelevant. The company wasn't defined by that moment anymore. It was defined by how it ran afterward. One afternoon, while reviewing regional performance, I noticed a margin improvement in a division that had struggled for years. No announcement, no credit claimed. Just a manager who finally had the authority to act, and did. That's when I knew the chapter was closed. Not because I had won something, but because the machine no longer depended on me to stay upright. People sometimes ask how it felt to watch Michelle's trajectory collapse in real time. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like gravity. You ignore structure long enough, and it corrects you. Not loudly, not personally, just thoroughly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't argue. I read the system. I respected it. And when the moment came, I let it speak. The business card is still in my jacket pocket. The same one Michelle laughed at. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Authority borrowed from proximity evaporates the moment conditions change. Authority earned through work remains, even when no one is watching. That's what stayed. And that's what kept the lights on when the noise finally faded.